Elena had always loved Valentine's Day. It was special to her. She lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, and every year, on this day, her husband, Mikhail, would surprise her with thoughtful gifts. Flowers, cards, romantic dinners, it was like a fairy tale. But this year, something felt off. In the morning, Elena received a strange letter. It was addressed to her, but there was no return address. The envelope looked old, with yellowed edges, and it simply read, "Your love awaits you." Curious, she opened it, and inside, she found a note that read, "You left me, but I'm still here. I'm waiting for you." At first, Elena thought it was a mistake, maybe a prank or a misaddressed letter. But deep down, she felt something was wrong. This letter didn't feel like an ordinary message, it felt alive. By evening, Mikhail still hadn't arrived home. Elena, uneasy, tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. A cold chill settled over her. She thought about the letter again and couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for her. A creeping sense of dread began to wash over her. When night fell, she went outside to check the mail again, as if expecting something else to arrive. The sky had grown dark, and the wind howled through the trees. As she stood in front of the mailbox, she heard a faint whisper behind her, a voice she knew all too well. "Elena." Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, but the yard was empty. A figure was not far from her house, standing in the shadows. It was him. Mikhail. Relief flooded her for a moment, but as she stepped closer, she noticed something chilling. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, and he was standing motionless as if waiting for her. "Mikhail," she called, voice trembling. He didn't move. His mouth parted, but instead of speaking, he let out a faint, dry rasp. "I'm here. Always here." Suddenly, Elena remembered the words in the letter, "I'm waiting for you." The wind picked up, the trees creaked, and she realized with horror that this was not the husband she had known. This wasn't the man she had married. This was something else. In a panic, she turned to run back inside, but before she could reach the door, Mikhail's hand shot out, cold as death, grabbing her wrist. "You left me, Elena. I've been waiting for you, in the dark." The last thing Elena heard before everything went silent was the eerie sound of a distant heart beating in the night, her own. It was the night of Valentine's Day when Clara moved into the old Victorian house on the edge of town. She had recently broken up with her longtime boyfriend and decided to start fresh, far from her old life. The house was large and somewhat dilapidated, but it was affordable and isolated, exactly what she needed. Her first night there felt peaceful at first. The house creaked with age, but it had character. As Clara settled in, she found an old, dust-covered box tucked away in the attic. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Inside was an assortment of old, crumpled letters, each marked with a red wax seal. But one letter stood out, its handwriting was familiar, but she couldn't place it. She opened it with trembling hands, and the words made her blood run cold. "Clara, I'm still waiting for you. You can't leave me. We belong together." She was confused. Who was this letter from? She had never received anything like it before. A strange sense of unease settled in her chest, but she brushed it off. The house was old, and maybe it had just belonged to the previous owner. She threw the letter away and tried to sleep. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she heard faint whispers, soft and distant, as if coming from the walls themselves. At first, she tried to ignore them, thinking it was the house settling. But the whispers grew louder, and she could make out one word, "Clara." Suddenly, she felt cold fingers brush against her cheek. She jerked awake, heart pounding, but when she looked around, no one was there. Terrified, she locked the door and tried to calm herself, but the whispers continued. The next day, she decided to leave the house for a while, hoping the fresh air would calm her nerves. But as she stepped outside, she saw something chilling. In the snow, leading up to her doorstep, were fresh footprints. They were small, almost delicate, as if someone had been walking around her house in the middle of the night. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Who had been here? That night, the whispers were louder than ever. This time, Clara couldn't ignore them. She followed the sound, which led her to the attic, where the old box still sat. As she opened it once again, a letter fluttered out, a letter she had never seen before. It was written in the same familiar handwriting, but it wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to someone named Amelia. Amelia, I will never let you go. You are mine. Always. You can't escape me. A cold chill swept through the room, and Clara felt the unmistakable sensation that someone was standing right behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. Her heart raced as she noticed something she hadn't before, a faint shadow in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light. Suddenly, the shadow shifted, and she saw the outline of a figure, a woman, pale and disfigured, with empty, hollow eyes. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Clara's blood turned to ice as the figure pointed directly at her. You shouldn't have come here, the shadow whispered, now a voice, cold and chilling. You took my place. He's waiting for you, Clara. And you will never leave. Before Clara could react, the figure lunged, and the room went black. The next morning, the house was silent. The snow-covered footsteps had disappeared, and Clara was never seen again. The only thing left behind was a single letter, found in the attic. It was addressed to her. Clara, I've been waiting. Always. Sarah had always been skeptical of ghost stories. Growing up in a small town, she'd heard countless rumors about the old manor at the edge of town, especially around Valentine's Day. People said it was cursed, haunted by the spirit of a woman named Evelyn, who was jilted by her lover on Valentine's Day over a century ago. Sarah didn't believe in such things. She considered herself practical and rational. So when she received an invitation to a Valentine's Day party at the manor, she dismissed it as just another town legend. Curious, though, and always up for an adventure, Sarah decided to attend. As she arrived at the manor, a chill ran down her spine. The house stood like a massive, decaying relic from the past. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown, but there was an eerie kind of beauty to it. The invitation had come with an address but no sender, which Sarah thought was odd. Inside, the house was filled with people, more than she expected. It was dimly lit by candlelight, casting long shadows on the walls. Music played softly in the background, and glasses clinked. But something felt off. The guests seemed distant, as if they were not truly there, their faces oddly blank. Still, Sarah tried to shake off the unease. She found a drink and mingled with the crowd, trying to ignore the strange feeling in her gut. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself drawn to a large, ornate mirror in one of the rooms. It hung on the wall, its silver frame tarnished and worn. The reflection in the glass was odd, distorted somehow. She leaned in closer, and for a brief moment, the reflection flickered, revealing a woman, pale, with hollow eyes and a white dress stained with red. The woman's lips parted in a silent scream, and then everything went black. When Sarah regained consciousness, she was no longer in the grand ballroom. She was in a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with the scent of roses, and in front of her, there was a large, black box wrapped in a crimson ribbon. Hesitantly, Sarah opened the box, her heart pounding. Inside, there was a single, delicate rose and a note. To my dearest Evelyn. I will never forget you. I promise we will be together, forever. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Slowly, she turned around. The room was now empty, but there, standing in the doorway, was a woman. Her face was deathly pale, her eyes dark and hollow, her wedding dress drenched in blood. You shouldn't have come, the woman whispered, her voice cold and hollow. "He never came for me. But he's here for you now. You'll never leave." Before Sarah could react, the woman stepped forward, and the room grew colder, the shadows lengthening. The rose in the box began to wither, turning black as if drained of life. Sarah tried to move, but her body was frozen in place. A sharp pain shot through her chest, and she screamed, but no sound came out. The woman reached forward and whispered one final word, her breath cold as ice against Sarah's skin. "Forever." The next morning, the manor was empty, as if no one had ever been there. The townspeople would later find Sarah's body in the garden, her face frozen in terror, a single black rose clutched tightly in her hand. The invitation was never found again. And so the legend continued, with Evelyn's spirit waiting, always waiting, for another heart to claim on Valentine's Day. The last Valentine. It had been a year since Lucy's boyfriend, Ethan, had passed away. He died in a car accident on Valentine's Day, a day that was supposed to be filled with love and joy for them. Instead, the accident left Lucy with a deep, unshakable sorrow. Every year since, she had struggled to move on, unable to let go of the memories of the man she once loved. This year, Lucy had made a decision to finally leave the past behind. She would spend Valentine's Day alone, reflecting on her life, but in a peaceful, healing way. She had moved to a small apartment in a quieter part of the city, hoping that time would bring her peace. As night fell on February 14th, Lucy curled up on the couch with a book, trying to distract herself. The clock ticked away, and the air in the apartment felt heavy. Around 9 p.m., just as she was starting to drift off, the doorbell rang. Startled, Lucy jumped up. No one ever came by this late, and she wasn't expecting any visitors. She cautiously approached the door, looking through the peephole. To her surprise, she saw a bouquet of roses lying on the doorstep, along with a small, white envelope. The roses were fresh, their petals soft and vibrant. She opened the door and bent down to pick up the flowers. As she did, she noticed something strange. The envelope had her name written on it, in handwriting she recognized. It was Ethan's handwriting. Her heart stopped. She dropped the flowers, her hands trembling, and ripped open the envelope. Inside, there was a single, handwritten note. Asterisk, "I'll always be with you, Lucy. Until we meet again." Asterisk. The words sent a chill down her spine. She felt dizzy, like she was on the edge of a nightmare. She hadn't seen Ethan's handwriting in over a year, since the last card he had written her before his death. How could this be? Was it a sick joke? A cruel prank? Shaking, she reached for her phone and dialed the number she'd sworn to forget. Ethan's old number. She stared at the screen, hesitating, before pressing the call button. To her shock, the call connected. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. "Hello." It was Ethan's voice. His warm, familiar voice. Lucy's heart raced. "Ethan," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Is this really you?" There was a long pause. The voice on the other end seemed distant, faint. "Lucy. I never wanted to leave you," Ethan's voice cracked. "But I had to. It wasn't our time. It wasn't supposed to be like this." The line crackled, and suddenly, the voice shifted. It became colder, more distorted. "But I'm still here. You'll never escape me." Lucy froze. Her skin went ice-cold as the voice turned into an eerie whisper. "You'll never be alone, Lucy. Not ever." The phone went dead. Lucy's hands shook uncontrollably as she dropped the device to the floor. The room grew darker, colder, and the silence felt suffocating. She turned to the roses that had been left at her door, but they were gone. Vanished. The envelope too. Panicking, she rushed to the window, but there was no one in sight. The street was empty. Her heart pounded in her chest. Suddenly, she heard a faint knock at the door. Her pulse quickened, and with trembling hands, she slowly approached the door again. "Lucy," a voice whispered from the other side. "Let me in." It was Ethan's voice again. This time, it was unmistakable, as if he were standing right there. Lucy backed away from the door, her body frozen in terror. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The doorbell rang again, louder this time. And then, as if on cue, the door creaked open slowly, by itself. In the darkness, standing in the threshold, was a shadow. A figure in a dark coat, its face obscured. Lucy couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, but her body refused to move. And then, in a voice that sounded like it came from the deepest, coldest part of the earth, the figure whispered. "I promised I'd always be with you." The last thing Lucy felt was a cold hand on her shoulder before everything went black. The next morning, when neighbors reported strange noises from her apartment, they found the door wide open. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been the night before. Her book lay on the coffee table, the phone still on the floor, but Lucy was gone. Only a single white rose remained, resting on the windowsill, with a note attached. "I'm waiting for you. Always. The Valentine's gift." It was the year after Jamie's tragic breakup with the love of her life, Ryan. They had been together for 3 years, and Valentine's Day had always been their day. But last year, everything fell apart. Ryan had vanished without a trace, leaving only a broken heart and a haunting emptiness in Jamie's life. The police had searched for him, but no one knew where he went. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. This Valentine's Day, Jamie decided to try to move on. She made plans to visit a friend for the evening, away from the sadness that had plagued her life for months. But as the night wore on, she received an unexpected delivery at her door. A small, elegant box wrapped in deep red velvet. There was no return address, just a card that simply said, "For my love. Always. Jamie's heart skipped a beat. Ryan used to send her gifts on Valentine's Day, often with little notes like that. She hesitated, feeling a mixture of dread and hope, but curiosity won out. She slowly opened the box, heart pounding in her chest. Inside was a delicate silver locket, engraved with a heart and a small inscription that read, "Until we meet again." A chill ran down her spine. The words felt too familiar. Ryan used to say that to her, all the time. But how could this be from him? It didn't make sense. He had been gone for a year. Her hands shook as she held the locket, and she noticed a faint smell of roses wafting from it, almost as if it had just been placed there. A whisper of a memory, a time when Ryan was still in her life. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, and Jamie jumped. A text message appeared on the screen. It was from Ryan's old number, the number that had been disconnected after he disappeared. "I miss you, Jamie. I'm still here, waiting." Her breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be real. There was no way Ryan could have sent that. The message was followed by another one. "I'm so close now, Jamie. So close." Jamie's heart raced as she looked around her apartment. The air felt thick, heavy with something she couldn't explain. She reached for the locket again, and as her fingers brushed it, the room seemed to darken. The lights flickered, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. The phone buzzed once more, but this time, the screen showed an incoming call. Without thinking, Jamie answered. "Hello." Her voice trembled. There was silence on the other end of the line, a deep, suffocating silence. Then, finally, a voice broke through the quiet. "Jamie," it was Ryan's voice. But it sounded different, distorted, like it was coming from far away, from the depths of something dark. "I told you. I'd always be with you. Jamie's breath caught in her throat. Ryan. Where are you? What's happening? The voice chuckled, low and hollow. I've been waiting for you. You weren't supposed to leave me. You were supposed to stay. Jamie's hands shook as she clutched the phone tighter. The room around her seemed to close in, the shadows growing longer and more oppressive. The whispers in the air became louder, and Jamie could hear faint footsteps behind her, like someone was pacing in the darkness just beyond her sight. Ryan, please, stop. What do you want from me? Jamie screamed, the terror flooding her chest. I never wanted to leave you, Jamie, the voice continued, now growing more frantic. You left me behind. You moved on. But I can't. I can't leave you. Suddenly, the line went dead. The silence was deafening. Asterisk. Before she could react, the room seemed to shudder, and then everything went dark. The air became suffocating, and the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Jamie dropped the phone, her body frozen in fear. In the darkness, a cold breath brushed against her ear, and a whisper, so faint and chilling, echoed in the room. Asterisk, I'm here, Jamie. I'm with you. Forever. Asterisk. When the lights came back on, Jamie was gone. The only thing left behind was the locket, still cold to the touch, and the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. Jamie's eyes darted around the room, but there was no sign of anyone. Her heart was racing, but everything seemed still. Everything, except for the locket in her hand. It had started to grow cold, unnaturally cold. With trembling fingers, she opened the locket, hoping for some kind of sign, some clue to explain what was happening. Inside, instead of a photo, was a small, brittle scrap of paper. Written in the same handwriting as the note in the box, it read. Asterisk, you can't run from me, Jamie. I'm closer than you think. And this Valentine's Day, I'm taking what was mine. The forgotten Valentine. Sophia had always looked forward to Valentine's Day. It was the one day of the year where she and her husband, Mark, would exchange thoughtful gifts and express their love. But this year was different. Mark had been acting strangely for weeks, distant and distracted, and Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On the eve of Valentine's Day, Mark had left for a business trip, or at least, that's what he told her. She spent the day alone, lost in her thoughts, and as the evening wore on, she tried to push aside the growing unease that had been gnawing at her. She even tried to enjoy the dinner she had prepared for herself, but it felt hollow. The doorbell rang unexpectedly just after sunset, breaking the silence. Confused, Sophia went to the door. Standing there was a delivery man holding a small, ornate box. There was no return address, just a small note attached. Asterisk, for the love of your life, forever. Asterisk. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Her first thought was that it was a surprise from Mark, perhaps a late gift. But as she opened the box, her excitement quickly turned to confusion. Inside was an antique-looking heart-shaped locket, tarnished with age. It was beautifully crafted, but the chain was broken, and the metal felt cold to the touch. As she turned the locket over, she noticed a name engraved on the back, asterisk Evelyn. Asterisk, the name didn't mean anything to her. Who was Evelyn? Was this a mistake? Then, something strange happened. The locket seemed to vibrate in her hand, just slightly, but enough to send a jolt through her. The unease that had been building in Sophia surged to a full-blown panic. Why had it been sent to her? Why was it from someone she didn't know? Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. But when she opened it, the message was chilling. Asterisk, Sophia, I need to tell you something. It's about Evelyn. Please, don't open the locket. I'm sorry. Asterisk. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She frantically tried calling Mark, but there was no answer. Her mind raced. Who was Evelyn? Why had Mark sent her this? The room felt colder now, and the air thickened with a strange tension. Unable to resist, she opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph, a picture of Mark, but with another woman. The woman in the photo was smiling, her arm wrapped around Mark's waist. The woman was beautiful, her dark eyes sparkling, and the background showed a familiar setting, Sophia's own house. The room seemed to spin. It couldn't be. This photo was taken years before she met Mark, and yet, there was no mistaking the familiarity of the setting. Sophia realized, with horror, that the photograph had been taken in their living room. The woman in the photo was standing where Sophia had stood earlier that evening, in front of the fireplace. The phone buzzed again, but this time, it was not a message from Mark. It was a text from an unknown number. * Evelyn was the one I loved before you. The one I never stopped loving. *. The air around her grew colder still, and the walls seemed to close in. Panic rose in her chest as the lights flickered, casting long shadows throughout the house. She could feel the temperature drop, her breath becoming visible in the air. Her mind raced as she scrambled for answers. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. Frozen, Sophia slowly moved toward the door, her heart pounding. She knew it wasn't Mark, he hadn't been home all day. She opened the door slightly, and there stood a woman, tall, pale, and dressed in a long black coat. Her eyes were dark and hollow, like they had seen things no one should ever witness. "Sophia," the woman said, her voice smooth and calm. "I am Evelyn. I've been waiting for you." The word struck Sophia like a blow to the chest. The woman's eyes bore into hers, unblinking, as if they were connected by something ancient, something that went beyond time. "I was the one he promised to love forever," Evelyn continued, her voice almost a whisper. "But he left me. He promised he'd return to me. But he didn't." Sophia's throat tightened. "You're dead." Evelyn smiled coldly. "I never left. I've been here, waiting. And now, it's your turn to leave." Before Sophia could react, Evelyn stepped forward. Her cold fingers brushed against Sophia's skin, sending an icy chill through her body. The room seemed to darken as the woman's figure blurred and shifted, until Sophia could barely make out her form. Everything went black. The next morning, Mark returned home. He found the house in complete disarray, the lights flickering faintly. But there was no sign of Sophia. The only thing left behind was the locket, sitting on the kitchen table. The photograph inside had changed. Now, it showed Mark, standing with a pale, lifeless Evelyn in the exact same spot where Sophia had stood just the night before. The inscription on the back of the locket had been altered, and now it read, "Forever with me." Mark's hands shook as he dropped the locket onto the table. He turned, and in the reflection of the window, he saw the shadowy figure of a woman standing behind him, her hollow eyes watching. The Valentine's curse. Mia had always been skeptical of the stories people told about curses, but there was one that had haunted her family for generations, especially on Valentine's Day. It was an old tale passed down through the women in her family, and every year, they would remind each other, never accept roses on Valentine's Day. The story was simple, yet chilling. It was said that many years ago, a beautiful woman named Isabella had been jilted by her lover on Valentine's Day. Heartbroken and enraged, she had cursed the holiday, vowing that every Valentine's Day, a woman would receive a bouquet of roses from someone she trusted, only for that woman to meet a terrible fate before the day ended. Mia always dismissed it as just an old superstition. But when she moved into her new apartment this year, far away from her family's warnings, the strange things began to happen. On Valentine's morning, a bouquet of deep red roses appeared on her doorstep. There was no note, no sign of who had sent them. Confused, Mia assumed they were from her boyfriend, James. They had been dating for a few months, and he was always thoughtful with his gifts. She brought the roses inside, admiring their beauty as she set them on the kitchen table. But as the day went on, Mia started to feel uneasy. The roses, while lovely, seemed to wilt at an unnatural speed. Each time she glanced at them, their petals drooped more, turning from vibrant red to a sickly brown. Her stomach churned, a sense of dread beginning to creep in. As evening approached, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, James stood there, smiling, holding a small box wrapped in red paper. She immediately felt a wave of relief, but when she invited him inside, she noticed something unsettling. James looked different. His smile seemed too wide, his eyes too intense. He had never looked like this before. "Happy Valentine's Day, Mia," he said, his voice slightly strained. "Thank you. But James, She stopped herself, unable to finish her sentence. Something felt wrong. "Are you okay?" James asked, his smile stretching even further. "You look a little pale." Mia tried to shake off the feeling. "It's just, these roses," she said, gesturing to the wilted flowers on the table. "They're kind of strange." James glanced at the flowers, his smile faltering for a split second, but then he regained his composure. "Roses are a symbol of love, Mia. They just take a little time to bloom and fade." "Yeah, I guess," Mia replied, still feeling off. The night dragged on, and though she tried to enjoy the evening, Mia couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease gnawing at her. Every time she looked at James, something felt wrong, like he wasn't truly there. He spoke to her in an almost robotic tone, his movements stiff and deliberate. When she went to the kitchen to grab more wine, she noticed something strange: the roses were gone. She was certain she had left them on the table, but now, they had vanished completely. Confused, she turned back to James. "James? Where are the roses?" He was standing by the window, staring outside. His posture was unnervingly rigid. "What happened to the flowers?" she asked again, voice trembling. James slowly turned to face her, his eyes now completely black, like two endless voids. He no longer seemed human. "You shouldn't have accepted them, Mia," he whispered, his voice low and distorted. "You should have listened to the warnings." Before Mia could respond, the lights flickered and the room grew freezing cold. The roses reappeared, this time, in a vase in the center of the room, but they were no longer beautiful. The flowers were blackened, twisted, and rotting, giving off a pungent, decaying stench. James stepped forward, his mouth curling into a grotesque grin. "You accepted them. Now, you'll suffer the curse." Mia's blood ran cold. Her heart hammered in her chest as she backed away, but before she could escape, the room spun, her vision blurring, the walls seemed to close in on her as James's figure grew larger, towering over her. With a sickening sound, his form shifted. He was no longer human, his face had contorted into something monstrous, a mask of horror and rage. "Do you feel it now?" he growled, his voice growing deeper, more guttural. "The curse of Isabella, you'll never escape it." Mia screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of cracking glass, as the roses suddenly exploded into a cloud of petals and thorns. They rained down on her, each thorn like a needle piercing her skin. The air was thick with the scent of death. Her vision went black. The next morning, James was gone. No trace of him remained. The apartment was silent, but as Mia stumbled to the mirror, she saw something that made her heart stop. Her reflection was distorted. Her once bright eyes had turned completely black, like two dark, endless holes. In the center of her chest was a deep, crimson rose-shaped bruise, pulsing with an eerie energy. As she touched it, she felt a sharp pain, followed by the faint whisper of a woman's voice. "The curse is never over." Mia's scream echoed throughout the empty apartment as the roses, black and dead, reappeared on the table, their presence a constant reminder of the curse that would follow her, always, on Valentine's Day. The forgotten Valentine. Sophia had always looked forward to Valentine's Day. It was the one day of the year where she and her husband, Mark, would exchange thoughtful gifts and express their love. But this year was different. Mark had been acting strangely for weeks, distant and distracted, and Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On the eve of Valentine's Day, Mark had left for a business trip, or at least, that's what he told her. She spent the day alone, lost in her thoughts, and as the evening wore on, she tried to push aside the growing unease that had been gnawing at her. She even tried to enjoy the dinner she had prepared for herself, but it felt hollow. The doorbell rang unexpectedly just after sunset, breaking the silence. Confused, Sophia went to the door. Standing there was a delivery man holding a small, ornate box. There was no return address, just a small note attached. Asterisk, for the love of your life, forever. Asterisk. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Her first thought was that it was a surprise from Mark, perhaps a late gift. But as she opened the box, her excitement quickly turned to confusion. Inside was an antique-looking heart-shaped locket, tarnished with age. It was beautifully crafted, but the chain was broken, and the metal felt cold to the touch. As she turned the locket over, she noticed a name engraved on the back, asterisk Evelyn. Asterisk the name didn't mean anything to her. Who was Evelyn? Was this a mistake? Then, something strange happened. The locket seemed to vibrate in her hand, just slightly, but enough to send a jolt through her. The unease that had been building in Sophia surged to a full-blown panic. Why had it been sent to her? Why was it from someone she didn't know? Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. But when she opened it, the message was chilling. Asterisk, Sophia, I need to tell you something. It's about Evelyn. Please, don't open the locket. I'm sorry. Asterisk. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She frantically tried calling Mark, but there was no answer. Her mind raced. Who was Evelyn? Why had Mark sent her this? The room felt colder now, and the air thickened with a strange tension. Unable to resist, she opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph, a picture of Mark, but with another woman. The woman in the photo was smiling, her arm wrapped around Mark's waist. The woman was beautiful, her dark eyes sparkling, and the background showed a familiar setting, Sophia's own house. The room seemed to spin. It couldn't be. This photo was taken years before she met Mark, and yet, there was no mistaking the familiarity of the setting. Sophia realized, with horror, that the photograph had been taken in their living room. The woman in the photo was standing where Sophia had stood earlier that evening, in front of the fireplace. The phone buzzed again, but this time, it was not a message from Mark. It was a text from an unknown number. Asterisk Evelyn was the one I loved before you. The one I never stopped loving. Asterisk. The air around her grew colder still, and the walls seemed to close in. Panic rose in her chest as the lights flickered, casting long shadows throughout the house. She could feel the temperature drop, her breath becoming visible in the air. Her mind raced as she scrambled for answers. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. Frozen, Sophia slowly moved toward the door, her heart pounding. She knew it wasn't Mark, he hadn't been home all day. She opened the door slightly, and there stood a woman, tall, pale, and dressed in a long black coat. Her eyes were dark and hollow, like they had seen things no one should ever witness. Sophia, the woman said, her voice smooth and calm. I am Evelyn. I've been waiting for you. The word struck Sophia like a blow to the chest. The woman's eyes bore into hers, unblinking, as if they were connected by something ancient, something that went beyond time. I was the one he promised to love forever, Evelyn continued, her voice almost a whisper. But he left me. He promised he'd return to me. But he didn't. Sophia's throat tightened. You're dead. Evelyn smiled coldly. I never left. I've been here, waiting. And now, it's your turn to leave." Before Sophia could react, Evelyn stepped forward. Her cold fingers brushed against Sophia's skin, sending an icy chill through her body. The room seemed to darken as the woman's figure blurred and shifted, until Sophia could barely make out her form. Everything went black. The next morning, Mark returned home. He found the house in complete disarray, the lights flickering faintly. But there was no sign of Sophia. The only thing left behind was the locket, sitting on the kitchen table. The photograph inside had changed. Now, it showed Mark, standing with a pale, lifeless Evelyn in the exact same spot where Sophia had stood just the night before. The inscription on the back of the locket had been altered, and now it read, "Forever with me." Mark's hands shook as he dropped the locket onto the table. He turned, and in the reflection of the window, he saw the shadowy figure of a woman standing behind him, her hollow eyes watching. The forgotten Valentine. Sophia had always looked forward to Valentine's Day. It was the one day of the year where she and her husband, Mark, would exchange thoughtful gifts and express their love. But this year was different. Mark had been acting strangely for weeks, distant and distracted, and Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. On the eve of Valentine's Day, Mark had left for a business trip, or at least, that's what he told her. She spent the day alone, lost in her thoughts, and as the evening wore on, she tried to push aside the growing unease that had been gnawing at her. She even tried to enjoy the dinner she had prepared for herself, but it felt hollow. The doorbell rang unexpectedly just after sunset, breaking the silence. Confused, Sophia went to the door. Standing there was a delivery man holding a small, ornate box. There was no return address, just a small note attached. "For the love of your life, forever." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Her first thought was that it was a surprise from Mark, perhaps a late gift. But as she opened the box, her excitement quickly turned to confusion. Inside was an antique-looking heart-shaped locket, tarnished with age. It was beautifully crafted, but the chain was broken, and the metal felt cold to the touch. As she turned the locket over, she noticed a name engraved on the back, Evelyn. The name didn't mean anything to her. Who was Evelyn? Was this a mistake? Then, something strange happened. The locket seemed to vibrate in her hand, just slightly, but enough to send a jolt through her. The unease that had been building in Sophia surged to a full-blown panic. Why had it been sent to her? Why was it from someone she didn't know? Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. But when she opened it, the message was chilling. "Sophia, I need to tell you something. It's about Evelyn. Please, don't open the locket. I'm sorry." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She frantically tried calling Mark, but there was no answer. Her mind raced. Who was Evelyn? Why had Mark sent her this? The room felt colder now, and the air thickened with a strange tension. Unable to resist, she opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph, a picture of Mark, but with another woman. The woman in the photo was smiling, her arm wrapped around Mark's waist. The woman was beautiful, her dark eyes sparkling, and the background showed a familiar setting, Sophia's own house. The room seemed to spin. It couldn't be. This photo was taken years before she met Mark, and yet, there was no mistaking the familiarity of the setting. Sophia realized, with horror, that the photograph had been taken in their living room. The woman in the photo was standing where Sophia had stood earlier that evening, in front of the fireplace. The phone buzzed again, but this time, it was not a message from Mark. It was a text from an unknown number. "Evelyn was the one I loved before you. The one I never stopped loving." The air around her grew colder still, and the walls seemed to close in. Panic rose in her chest as the lights flickered, casting long shadows throughout the house. She could feel the temperature drop, her breath becoming visible in the air. Her mind raced as she scrambled for answers. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. Frozen, Sophia slowly moved toward the door, her heart pounding. She knew it wasn't Mark, he hadn't been home all day. She opened the door slightly, and there stood a woman, tall, pale, and dressed in a long black coat. Her eyes were dark and hollow, like they had seen things no one should ever witness. "Sophia," the woman said, her voice smooth and calm. "I am Evelyn. I've been waiting for you." The word struck Sophia like a blow to the chest. The woman's eyes bore into hers, unblinking, as if they were connected by something ancient, something that went beyond time. "I was the one he promised to love forever," Evelyn continued, her voice almost a whisper. "But he left me. He promised he'd return to me. But he didn't." Sophia's throat tightened. "You're dead." Evelyn smiled coldly. "I never left. I've been here, waiting. And now, it's your turn to leave." Before Sophia could react, Evelyn stepped forward. Her cold fingers brushed against Sophia's skin, sending an icy chill through her body. The room seemed to darken as the woman's figure blurred and shifted, until Sophia could barely make out her form. Everything went black. The next morning, Mark returned home. He found the house in complete disarray, the lights flickering faintly. But there was no sign of Sophia. The only thing left behind was the locket, sitting on the kitchen table. The photograph inside had changed. Now, it showed Mark, standing with a pale, lifeless Evelyn in the exact same spot where Sophia had stood just the night before. The inscription on the back of the locket had been altered, and now it read, "Forever with me." Mark's hands shook as he dropped the locket onto the table. He turned, and in the reflection of the window, he saw the shadowy figure of a woman standing behind him, her hollow eyes watching. The Valentine's Day heart. Emma had always been a fan of the romantic allure of Valentine's Day. The flowers, the chocolates, the love letters, it was the one day of the year when she felt the closest to something magical. But this year, Valentine's Day was different. It had all started when she found an antique locket at the thrift shop she loved to visit. The locket was silver, intricately designed, with delicate roses etched into its surface. When she held it, it felt heavier than it looked, almost like it had been waiting for someone to find it. As soon as she clasped the tiny heart-shaped pendant around her neck, an inexplicable chill crawled up her spine. But Emma shrugged it off as nothing more than the cold breeze that had been sweeping through the shop. That evening, after a long day at work, she opened the locket. Inside was a small folded piece of yellowed paper, with a single line written in beautiful, delicate handwriting. "To my dearest love, forever yours, always." Emma was touched. The romantic words spoke to her, as if someone had poured their heart into this little piece of history. But as she read the note, a creeping feeling washed over her, a feeling that she was being watched. Later that night, as she prepared to head to bed, she caught a glimpse of herself in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw something moving behind her, something dark, flickering in the reflection. But when she turned around, the bathroom was empty. Her heart raced as she quickly dismissed it, telling herself it was just her imagination. She locked the door, climbed into bed, and tried to forget the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. But just as she was about to drift off to sleep, the softest whisper echoed in her ear, as if someone was standing next to her. "I'm here, Emma." Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She sat up in bed, her breath shallow, and looked around the room, but there was no one there. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Shaking her head, she told herself she was just being paranoid. It had to be a trick of the mind, right? She closed her eyes, trying to calm down, but the whisper returned, louder this time. "I'm waiting for you, Emma." Forever waiting. Asterisk. Frozen in terror, Emma quickly reached for the locket, hoping to find some comfort. But as her fingers grazed the cold metal, the room went cold. The air became thick, almost suffocating, as if something was pressing down on her. A low, guttural laugh filled the air, and she could feel someone, moving closer. The locket began to heat up in her hand, far hotter than it should have been. Desperate, Emma flung it across the room, watching it hit the wall and fall to the floor. The room was now completely dark, and the whispering had turned into a constant, maddening chant. Asterisk, you opened the heart. You let me in. Asterisk. Suddenly, the lights flickered on again. Standing in the doorway of her bedroom was a figure. It was a woman, but her features were distorted and twisted, like a faded reflection in a cracked mirror. Her eyes were wide and dark, empty voids, and her lips were curled into a grotesque, frozen smile. Asterisk, you wanted love, didn't you, Emma? Asterisk, the woman said, her voice soft yet full of malice. Asterisk, I gave it to you. Asterisk. The woman took a step forward, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with an oppressive, suffocating cold, and Emma's breath came in short gasps. The woman's form shimmered and flickered, her body like smoke that seemed to dissolve and reform with each step. Asterisk, what do you want from me? Asterisk, Emma whispered, her voice trembling. The woman tilted her head, her empty eyes locking with Emma's. Asterisk, I want nothing from you. I've already given everything. You took what was never yours. Asterisk. Emma's eyes darted to the locket, which had fallen to the floor beside the bed. It was glowing faintly, the silver now darkened and covered in an eerie black mist. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, her fingers brushing against the locket's surface. The moment she touched it, a searing pain shot through her chest, as though her heart had been gripped by icy fingers. She gasped, falling back onto the bed, her eyes wide with terror. The woman's laughter filled the room, growing louder and louder, until it felt like it was inside her mind. Asterisk, you've taken my heart, Emma. And now, you will never escape. Asterisk. The woman's figure loomed over Emma, her hands reaching out to touch her. As her cold fingers brushed against Emma's skin, everything went dark. The next morning, Emma's neighbors grew concerned when they noticed her apartment door was ajar. They called the landlord, who let himself in, only to find Emma's apartment completely empty. The furniture was undisturbed, and everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The locket, now lying in the middle of the floor, glowed faintly with a dark, unnatural light. Despite the best efforts of the authorities, no trace of Emma was ever found. And as the years passed, the locket remained, sitting in a small antique shop, waiting to find its next victim. Every year, on Valentine's Day, the shop owner would watch as new customers entered, but none ever left with the heart-shaped locket. The curse of the heart continued, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the next lonely soul to open the heart and unleash the vengeful spirit of love that would never let go. Because some hearts, once opened, can never be closed again. The Valentine's Day Letter. Hannah had never been one for surprises. She enjoyed the simple things, books, tea, and a quiet evening at home. But this Valentine's Day, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was waiting for her. It all began the day before, when she received a plain, unmarked envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting on the front was elegant and precise, though she didn't recognize the name or address. The letter was simple, with only a few words written on the inside. Asterisk, meet me at the old church at midnight. I've waited for you. Asterisk. Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know anyone who would send her such a message, and the thought of meeting a stranger in the dead of night filled her with unease. Still, curiosity got the better of her. Maybe it was a prank, or perhaps a mistake. But something about the letter felt real, something about it tugged at her. That night, as the clock struck 11, she found herself standing in front of the abandoned church at the edge of town. The building had been empty for years, the stone walls crumbling and covered in ivy. The moonlight bathed it in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the steps. Hannah hesitated but pushed the door open anyway. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the scent of old wood lingered in the silence. The only sound was her footsteps echoing through the vast, empty hall. She called out, her voice trembling. "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the creak of the old wooden beams above. As she stepped deeper into the church, something caught her eye, an old, faded red envelope lying on the altar. Without thinking, she walked up to it and picked it up. Her heart raced as she opened it, her hands shaking. Inside, there was only a single sentence written in the same elegant handwriting as the first letter. Asterisk, the one you love has already been taken. Asterisk. A wave of dread washed over her. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, the door slammed shut behind her, locking her in. Panic set in, her breath quickening as the church seemed to close in around her. The candlelight in the room flickered to life, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice barely above a whisper. From the darkness, a figure slowly emerged. It was a man, his features hidden beneath a dark cloak. His face was obscured, but Hannah felt his presence deeply, as if he were right behind her. "I've waited for you," the man's voice echoed softly, yet the tone carried an unnatural weight, like an echo from a forgotten time. Hannah stepped back, her heart racing in her chest. "What do you want?" The figure moved closer, his movements unnervingly slow, like he was savoring the moment. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows thickening. "You've been chosen, Hannah. Your heart, it was always meant to belong to me." Before she could respond, the figure reached out, grabbing her wrist with a grip that was like ice. His touch was freezing, and she could feel her pulse slow in his grasp. Her vision began to blur, her legs growing weak beneath her. She tried to pull away, but it was as if his hand had become part of her skin, impossible to break free. The figure leaned closer, his breath cold against her ear. "You see, I've waited a long time. And now, you'll join me forever." With a sudden, violent force, the church door creaked open again, but this time, it wasn't the wind. No, it was something much worse. The door swung wide, revealing a dark figure standing in the threshold. A woman, pale and lifeless, her eyes wide with sorrow and rage. Hannah's body froze in place as the woman stepped forward, her eyes locking onto hers with a silent warning. The woman opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, her cold, dead hand reached toward the man. The figure holding Hannah stiffened, his grip weakening. His voice trembled as he whispered, "No, not her, not again." The woman reached out, her hand brushing against the man's chest, and then, as if some invisible force had snapped, he let go of Hannah. She fell to the ground, gasping for air, but the cold presence remained. The man backed away, his eyes wild, and without another word, he vanished into the shadows. Hannah struggled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She turned to the woman, who had not moved from the doorway. The woman's eyes seemed to pierce through her, as if she were searching for something deep within. And then, the woman finally spoke, her voice a hollow whisper. "Don't trust him. He only wants to break you, as he did to me." The woman's body began to disintegrate, the skin peeling away like old parchment. Her eyes locked with Hannah's one last time, full of unspoken sorrow. Valentine's Day is for love. But sometimes, love comes with a price. As the last of the woman's form faded into the air, the cold left with her. The church, which had once been so thick with shadows, now seemed empty, lifeless. Hannah was alone. She ran out of the church, her heart still pounding in her chest. The night air was cold, but it felt different now, heavy, suffocating, as if the world had been altered in some way. She never spoke of that night again. But every year, as Valentine's Day approached, she would find herself staring at the window, waiting for the next letter, knowing that whatever force was at play, whatever love had been broken, it would always return, seeking to claim what was never meant to be. And on every Valentine's Day, the darkness waited, for someone else. The Valentine's Day rose. Sophie had always been a lover of all things romantic. Her friends would often tease her for being a hopeless romantic, the kind who watched romantic movies and dreamed of perfect, fairy tale love. She couldn't help it. There was something about Valentine's Day that filled her with a sense of wonder, a feeling that love was something to be cherished and celebrated. This year, however, Valentine's Day felt different. It wasn't like the others. Sophie had been seeing a man named Alex for a few months, and though the relationship was still young, it felt serious. They had planned to spend the evening together, and Sophie was eager to see what the day would bring. On Valentine's morning, Alex surprised her with a gift. A single red rose, wrapped in elegant paper with a small note attached. The note read, "Asterisk, for the one who holds my heart. I've waited forever for you. Asterisk." Sophie smiled, her heart fluttering with excitement. But there was something odd about the rose. As she examined it more closely, she noticed its petals were unnaturally dark, darker than a normal rose should be, almost as if they were bruised. A faint chill seemed to emanate from the flower, but Sophie dismissed it, telling herself it was just her imagination. After all, it was Valentine's Day. She wasn't going to let anything ruin the moment. That evening, they had dinner at a quiet little restaurant, and Sophie felt happier than she had in a long time. Alex was charming, attentive, and everything she had ever wanted. After dinner, they took a walk in the park, the soft glow of streetlights casting shadows on the path. As they walked, Sophie couldn't help but notice something strange. She was beginning to feel off. Her skin prickled, and her heart rate quickened. It was as though a heavy presence had settled around her, like someone was watching her every move. She tried to brush it off, but the unease only grew. Then, just as they reached a quiet corner of the park, she noticed something in the distance. A figure, standing beneath a tree, shrouded in darkness. She couldn't make out any features, just a silhouette, but it felt like the figure was watching her. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, his voice cutting through her growing anxiety. Sophie turned to him, about to say something, when suddenly, the figure moved. It was fast, too fast. In the blink of an eye, it had closed the distance between them and now stood just a few feet away. Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she took a step back, but Alex didn't seem to notice. His smile was unervingly wide, and he seemed oddly calm. "Who is that?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. Alex turned to look where she was pointing, but the figure had disappeared. His expression shifted, a strange look in his eyes. "I don't see anyone, Sophie," he said. "But you're not alone. I'll always be with you. Always." Something in the way he said it made her uneasy. His words were too intense, too calculated. Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced down at the rose he had given her earlier. It was now wilting rapidly, the petals turning from deep red to black, curling and decaying before her very eyes. "Alex, what's happening?" Sophie whispered, the fear creeping into her voice. Alex smiled again, but it was no longer the warm, loving smile she was used to. It was cold, devoid of emotion. "I told you," he said softly, "I've been waiting for you. I've waited a long, long time." Sophie's body went cold as realization struck. The way he spoke, the way the world around them seemed to darken and distort, it wasn't real. Alex wasn't who he seemed to be. And the figure that had appeared in the shadows, it wasn't gone. Suddenly, a cold, hollow laugh filled the air, and the figure from earlier emerged from the shadows again. But this time, Sophie could see it clearly. The figure was a woman, pale as death, with hollow, lifeless eyes and skin that looked as though it had been drained of all color. Her clothes were tattered, as though they had been torn away by some unseen force. The woman reached out, her fingers long and skeletal, and as she stepped closer, Sophie felt a wave of dizziness overwhelm her. Her vision blurred, and her heart raced as the woman's cold breath washed over her. Sophie could hear her whispering, the words chilling and distorted. Asterisk, he promised me, forever. Asterisk. Alex, still standing beside her, turned to Sophie. His face contorted into something grotesque, his features shifting and changing, as though he was no longer human. His voice dropped to a low, haunting whisper. You belong to me now, Sophie. You always have. And now, I will keep you, forever. With a sudden jerk, the rose in Sophie's hand withered completely, turning to dust in her fingers. The woman reached for her fingers now inches away from Sophie's skin. The air around them was suffocating, cold and thick with an unnatural presence. Desperately, Sophie tried to break free, but the woman's touch was like ice, freezing her in place. The last thing Sophie saw before everything went black was Alex's twisted grin, his eyes now pitch black, filled with an ancient hunger. The next morning, the park was quiet. No one had seen Sophie since the previous evening. Her friends called, worried when she didn't answer her phone, but the police found nothing. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of anything unusual. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. All that remained was a single blackened rose, lying in the middle of the park path, its petals withered and decayed. Every year, as Valentine's Day approached, people in the town spoke in hushed whispers of Sophie's disappearance. They said the park grew colder during the days leading up to it, that strange shadows would appear near the old tree where Sophie had last been seen. And every year, on Valentine's Day, someone would find a black rose, dead, cold, and waiting. A reminder that sometimes love, once twisted, can consume you. The Valentine's Day curse. Mia had never been a fan of Valentine's Day. While others celebrated love and romance, she preferred to stay at home with a good book and a cup of tea. But this year, something changed. It was the day before Valentine's, and Mia received a strange gift in the mail. It was a small, ornate box, wrapped in crimson paper and tied with a black ribbon. No card, no return address, just her name written in elegant handwriting on the top. Curiosity piqued, she carefully untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a delicate porcelain doll, dressed in a faded, vintage dress with lace trim. The doll's glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she picked it up, and its porcelain skin was unnervingly cold to the touch. There was a note tucked beneath the doll, written in the same elegant script. Asterisk, for the one who has yet to know true love. Take care of her, and she will bring you what you seek. But beware, for love, once given, is never truly free. Asterisk. Mia shivered as she read the note, a chill running through her spine. She wasn't sure why, but the doll felt wrong, unnerving, as if it were watching her every move. She placed it back in the box, intending to leave it aside and forget about it. But that night, strange things began happening. As she lay in bed, trying to sleep, she heard a faint sound coming from the living room. At first, it was so quiet she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. But then the sound grew louder, soft footsteps, as if someone was walking around the room. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she got out of bed and crept toward the door. The house was dark, but when she peered into the living room, she froze. The porcelain doll was sitting on the couch. Mia's breath caught in her throat. It had been lying in the box, and she had made sure to leave it there. But now, there it was, as though someone had placed it there deliberately. Her legs shook as she stepped into the room, moving cautiously toward the doll. She reached out to grab it, but just before her fingers touched its cold porcelain face, a soft whisper filled the air. Asterisk, you are mine now. Asterisk. Mia jerked her hand back, her heart racing in terror. The voice was clear, feminine, and filled with an eerie, otherworldly quality. It echoed in her mind, a voice that wasn't her own. She quickly snatched the doll and tossed it back into the box, slamming the lid shut. She couldn't explain what had just happened, but she knew something was wrong. It wasn't just the doll, it was the feeling that something was following her, something watching her from the shadows. The house felt colder, as if a presence had settled within its walls. The next day, Mia tried to push the incident out of her mind. But as the hours passed, she began to notice strange occurrences. Objects moved on their own, the lights flickered unexpectedly, and whispers echoed faintly from empty rooms. The closer Valentine's Day got, the more intense the happenings became. On Valentine's evening, Mia decided to take the doll back to the antique store where it had come from, hoping to rid herself of it for good. She arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the store was cloaked in a dark, oppressive silence. The store's owner, an old woman with piercing eyes, greeted her without a word, as if she had been waiting for her. Mia placed the doll on the counter. "I need to return this. It's not right," she said, her voice trembling. The woman studied the doll for a long moment before nodding slowly. "That doll isn't something you can return," she said in a low voice. "It's part of a curse. A curse that binds the heart of the one who accepts it." Mia felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean? I don't want it anymore. Please, take it back." The old woman sighed, her face hardening with sorrow. "Once you take it, once you accept it, you belong to the curse. It will follow you, feed on your loneliness, your fear. And on Valentine's Day, it will claim what is left of your heart." Before Mia could say anything else, the woman turned and walked to the back of the store, leaving Mia standing in the dimly lit room. She glanced down at the doll, now resting on the counter, and a sudden understanding filled her. She wasn't going to be able to escape. The doll would never let her go. In a flash, the doll began to move. Its porcelain face twisted, a faint smile appearing on its lips. Mia stepped back in horror as its eyes glowed faintly with a pale, sickly light. The voice returned, louder this time, almost as if it were inside her head. "Asterisk, you cannot escape. You are mine. Forever. Asterisk." Mia screamed, but the voice drowned her out. The world around her seemed to distort as the doll's eyes burned into her soul. Her heartbeat thudded in her chest as her mind began to unravel. The last thing she saw was the doll's face, now distorted into something monstrous, its grin widening impossibly wide as it whispered one final time. "Asterisk, forever, together. Asterisk." The next morning, Mia's friends and family reported her missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no trace of her at all. But in the antique shop, the doll sat on the counter, its eyes now cold and lifeless once more. And every year, on Valentine's Day, a strange chill would fill the store, as if the cursed doll were waiting for its next victim, ready to claim the heart of anyone who dared to take it. Because some love never lets go.